Welcome students to the topic on pressure, volume, loop and heart sounds. This is in continuation with the cardiac cycle. So at the end of the session, the student should be able to describe pressure, volume, loop, describe the heart sounds. This comes under the physiology competency 5.3. What is pressure, volume, graph or pressure, volume, loop? It is a graph plotting pressure and volume of left ventricle at various stages of cardiac cycle. So you have the volume changes in the x-axis and the pressure changes in the y-axis. You start with one segment, one complete cardiac cycle. What are all the pressure and volume changes that are happening is recorded in the pressure volume loop. So what are all the phases of pressure volume loop? Here you have the left ventricular volume given in millimeters of mercury. This is filling, that means this is diastolic phase. Then you have the isovolumetric contraction and ejection. Then comes the isovolumetric relaxation. So from point C through D till A you have the diastole. From point A through B till C you have the systole. One diastole and one systole together will form one cardiac cycle. It is 0.8 seconds. So the first phase is period of filling. The second phase is isovolumetric contraction. Period of filling is the first phase. Second phase is isovolumetric contraction. Third phase is period of ejection. And fourth phase is isovolumetric relaxation. So in the x-axis, you have the left ventricular volume. It ranges from 50 to 130. In the y-axis, you have the intraventricular pressure changes ranging from 20 to 120 millimeters of mercury. The first thing to happen is the phase 1. Phase 1 is ventricular filling. The ventricular filling starts with opening of mitral valve. You have the ventricular filling. It starts with end systolic volume. End systolic volume is the amount of blood that is left at the end of systole. As the ventricle is getting filled with blood, the volume increases. At the end of diastole, you have the end diastolic volume. As the volume is increasing, the pressure does not change much because the ventricle is in the diastolic phase, except for the last phase, the last rapid filling phase, where the atria is going to contract and push 30% of the blood. There is not much change in pressure with change in volume. So the diastole ends with closure of the mitral valve. Once the mitral valve closed, what happens? The isovolumetric contraction phase occurs. The pressure increases, the volume remains the same. Isovolumetric contraction, and this isovolumetric contraction phase ends with opening of the aortic valve. Once the aortic valve is opened, what happens? Blood is ejected out. The volume is decreasing. The volume is decreasing. Once the aortic valve is open, it is entering into the greater arteries. The volume is decreasing. The pressure continues to increase. Okay. The volume is decreasing. The period of ejection is getting completed. This is the third phase. The aortic valve now closes. So closure of mitral valve. The systole starts. The closure of aortic valve. The systole ends. Closure of mitral valve produces first heart sound. Closure of aortic valve produces the second heart sound. As the aortic valve is now closed, what happens? The isovolumetric relaxation phase starts. The isovolumetric relaxation phase, the pressure decreases, the volume remains the same. The isovolumetric relaxation phase ends with opening up of the mitral valve. From end systolic volume, as blood accumulates, we reach the end diastolic volume. From end diastolic volume, some amount of blood is pumped into the greater arteries. So, end diastolic volume minus end systolic volume will give the stroke volume. How much is the end diastolic volume? The end diastolic volume is around 130. The end systolic volume is around 50. So, the stroke volume 130 minus 50 will work out to 70 ml. 70 ml is the stroke volume. What is ejection fraction? Ejection fraction is the stroke volume divided by the end diastolic volume. Out of the blood that is in the ventricle at the end of diastole, how much of blood is pumped out into the systemic or pulmonary circulation is the ejection fraction. So, how much of blood is pumped out? It is 70 ml. What is the total volume? It is around 130 ml. Out of 130 ml, 70 ml is ejected. This is your ejection fraction. Normal ejection fraction ranges from 60 to 70. Okay. So, ejection fraction is decided by the preload, afterload and cardiac contractility. These three factors will decide the ejection fraction. If the preload is more, that is, what is preload? The amount of blood that is in the ventricle. It is decided by venous return, ventricular compliance, pericardial compliance and valvular heart disease, atrial systole and valve thickness. Whenever the venous return is more, the preload will be more, the ejection fraction will be more. When the ventricle is more compliant, it is able to accommodate more blood, the ejection fraction will be more. If the ventricle is stiff, it is not able to accommodate more blood, the preload is going to be less, the ejection fraction also will be less. Coming to afterload, it represents the wall stress, the ventricular transmural pressure, the ventricular chamber radius and the ventricular wall thickness is again one factor. Afterload is mainly decided by the peripheral resistance. When the peripheral resistance is more, then the amount of blood ejected into the circulation will be less. Cardiac contractility, the force of contraction is directly proportional to the ejection fraction. The end systolic volume is affected by afterload and contractility, whereas the end diastolic volume is also decided by the preload and cardiac contractility.